Hey, vintage car fans. We're shifting gears a bit today, tailoring this deep dive specifically for you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners. You know those daily doses of automotive history you get on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and YouTube?
That's right.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into Noble Automotive, a company that's carves out quite a name for itself in the world of high-performance sports cars.
Yeah, they really have.
We got articles, historical overviews, even some excerpts from interviews, all ready to unpack what makes Noble tick.
It's a fascinating story, that's for sure. What always gets me about Noble is how they've managed to carve out their own space. It's not about being the biggest or the flashiest. It's really about that pure driving experience. Their
Mm.
cars are almost like a distillation of that ideal.
And that's exactly what we're going to explore. From their humble beginnings to their current lineup, we'll uncover what makes Noble stand out. It's not your typical supercar story, is it?
Oh, definitely not. To really get Noble, you have to start with Lee Noble, the founder. His passion for performance engineering is basically woven into the company's DNA.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. Before founding Noble in 1999, Lee had already made his mark at companies like Ultima and Ascari. But he had this burning desire to create something different.
He wanted to build a supercar that, how should I put it, punched above its weight class. Not just in terms of raw performance, but in challenging the very notion that a supercar had to have this exorbitant price tag.
He was aiming for, and I love this phrase, a cheaper, simpler vehicle,
Mhm.
one that emphasized pure engineering, kind of a David and Goliath approach in the supercar world.
Absolutely. And his creation, the Noble M12, which launched in 2000, became the embodiment of that philosophy. Lightweight, incredibly powerful, and it handled like a dream. It quickly picked up this nickname, the Ferrari Killer, and not without reason.
I mean, you can't really get much higher praise than Jeremy Clarkson, the former Top Gear host. He raved about the M12, saying it drove like cars 10 times its price.
Wow, talk about an endorsement. That's got to send shockwaves through the industry.
Absolutely. And Noble didn't just stop there. They kept refining the M12. The GTO, the GTO3, the GTO3R, and the absolute powerhouse, the M400. Each iteration just pushed the performance envelope even further.
It's like they were perfecting a formula.
They were, but then things take an unexpected turn. With the development of the M14, this was meant to be their competitor to Porsche and Ferrari GT models, a step up in the market, right?
Definitely. Aimed at a more, well, premium segment, but it was based on the M12 chassis. They gave it a new body, modernized the interior. So an evolution, but maybe not a revolution.
And this is where Lee Noble's, I guess you could call it stubborn, dedication to his vision really comes through. He scraps the entire M14 project.
Can you imagine? I mean, he felt it wasn't a significant enough leap to justify the price tag. He wouldn't compromise his vision, even with a potentially lucrative market just waiting.
Most companies would just said, full steam ahead. But not Lee Noble. Instead, he sets his sights on an even more ambitious project, the Noble M15. This was going to be a ground-up redesign. Bespoke gearbox from Graziano, a longitudinally mounted engine, the works.
The early impressions were glowing. Journalists who got to test the M15 prototype were just blown away by its performance, the handling. It seemed like Noble was poised to really shake things up.
And then, well, a twist worthy of a soap opera. Funding issues and a change in ownership lead to the M15's demise, and the new owner, Peter Dyson. Well, he even ordered the existing prototypes to be destroyed.
Wow, what a story. A real reminder of how fragile innovation can be, especially for a smaller company. The M15 might be this forgotten chapter, but it really speaks volumes about Noble's ambition and the challenges they faced.
Talk about a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
So far, we've got the rise of the M12, the aborted M14, and then this tragic saga of the M15. But Noble's story, it doesn't end there, does it?
No, not at all. They picked themselves up and went on to create the M600, which is their current flagship. It's this fascinating blend of Lee Noble's design philosophy and Peter Dyson's vision for the company.
And the M600 is an absolute monster. It's powered by a Yamaha-designed V8. They went all in on lightweight carbon fiber construction, too.
A purist's dream, really. Minimal electronic aids, it's all about that raw connection with the car and the road. Top speed, over 225 miles per hour, not for the faint of heart.
But they also introduced the M500 recently. A bit less extreme, but still very much driver-focused, kind of like an alternative to the M600, right?
Exactly. They're catering to different drivers within that niche who still crave that really intense driving experience. But let's be real, they're still a small player in a very competitive market, and the big names have a lot of resources to throw around.
So how does a company like Noble, with their commitment to hand-built quality and this driver engagement, how do they even survive in that environment? It's like they're swimming against the tide.
That's what makes them so intriguing. To really understand their resilience, we need to go back to the M12 and break down what made it such a game changer. It wasn't just about speed, it was about challenging the status quo.
Okay, so let's go back to that Ferrari killer era. What were the key ingredients that made the M12 so special? What allowed it to punch so far above its weight?
It all starts with the engine. Now, they didn't go for some exotic, bespoke power plant. They took a modified Ford Duratec V6, something readily available, and they tuned it to within an inch of its life.
So they were working with familiar technology, but pushing it to its absolute limits.
Precisely. Twin turbochargers, meticulous engineering, I mean, they squeezed out every single ounce of power. But equally as important was the weight. They were obsessed with keeping it as light as possible.
Which, of course, is crucial for both acceleration and handling, right? You can
Yeah.
have all the horsepower in the world, but if the car is heavy, it's not going to dance.
Exactly. They used a steel space frame chassis and fiberglass body panels, keeping the overall weight incredibly low. And this gave the M12 an insane power-to-weight ratio. It could outperform cars costing, several times more.
No wonder it got that Ferrari killer nickname. But, like you said earlier, it wasn't just about straight-line speed. The M12 was also renowned for its handling, its balance.
This is where Lee Noble's engineering genius really shines. He understood that a great sports car isn't just about brute force. It's about how that power is delivered, how the car communicates with the driver.
So it's not just about, the numbers on a spec sheet, but the feeling you get behind the wheel.
Absolutely. The M12 didn't rely on all these complex electronic aids or fancy suspension systems. It was mechanically pure, a well-tuned chassis, responsive steering, balanced weight distribution. It was all about the fundamentals.
And this simplicity, this focus on that raw driving experience, that's really the heart of what makes Noble so unique.
It was a car that allowed the driver to really connect with the machine, with the road, to experience the essence of driving in its purest form. And that resonated with people. It challenged this assumption that you needed, millions of dollars to experience that kind of thrill.
So the M12 was more than just a car, wasn't it? It was a statement.
It was.
And that statement continues to echo through Noble's lineup today, even in cars like the M600. Let's unpack that a bit. We touched on it earlier, but what really makes this supercar so unique, so distinctly Noble?
Well, the M600 is like the culmination of that whole philosophy. It's
Yeah.
powered by a Yamaha-designed V8, originally from the Volvo XC90, believe it or not, but Noble has tuned it to a staggering 650 horsepower.
Wow. But it's not just about raw power, though, right? They stuck to that lightweight construction philosophy.
Absolutely. They used carbon fiber extensively, keeping the weight under 1,200 kilograms. That's lighter than many sports cars with, half the horsepower. And the result, a 0 to 60 time of just over 3 seconds, and a top speed exceeding 225 miles per hour. It's in a different league.
Those are numbers that, they rival the most exotic supercars out there. But what sets the M600 apart, in true Noble fashion, is that focus on driver engagement. There's a deliberate lack of, electronic nannies here.
I want you to be fully present, feeling every nuance of the car's response. It's not about being coddled, it's about being connected.
They even included a variable boost control that lets the driver choose different power settings. Dial it down for a casual drive or unleash the full fury on the track.
It's like having multiple personalities in one car. And this minimalist approach, it extends to the interior as well.
Yeah, no massive infotainment screens or fancy gadgetry. It's stripped down to the essentials.
Mm.
The steering wheel, the pedals, and that raw feedback from the car.
It's a refreshing antidote to the over-digitalization of, so many modern cars. A reminder that true driving pleasure can be found in simplicity.
And to really drive that point home, they haven't even bothered with an automatic transmission option. The M600 is only available with the 6-speed manual gearbox.
A statement, for sure. It's like they're saying, look, if you want to drive this car, you need to be involved. You need to work for it. It demands your full attention and skill.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
Definitely not. But for those who crave that level of purity, that visceral connection, well, the M600 is a revelation.
It's a testament to Noble's just unwavering commitment to building driver-focused cars, no matter what the current trends might be. But speaking of going against the grain, let's go back to that ill-fated M15 for a moment.
Oh, yeah.
While it was ultimately unsuccessful, it does highlight Noble's willingness to innovate, to take those risks.
It does.
The M15 was intended to be this more refined, luxurious offering compared to the raw M12. It was their attempt to, cater to a slightly different market, one that wanted supercar performance with I don't know, a touch more comfort and usability.
Right. So a bit of a balancing act between their purist philosophy and, the demands of a wider market.
Yeah, exactly. And they designed a completely new platform for the M15 with a longitudinally mounted engine, a first for Noble. They even partnered with Graziano, the renowned Italian gearbox manufacturer, to develop a bespoke transmission.
Wow.
They were really pulling out all the stops for this one.
They were aiming high. And the early feedback was really promising. Journalists who got behind the wheel of that prototype, they praised the refinement, the handling, the overall performance. It really did look like Noble was on the verge of a major breakthrough.
But then, well, as we know, fate intervened. The combination of funding issues and that change in ownership led to the project being shelved.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's that story of Peter Dyson ordering the existing prototypes to be, well, destroyed.
It's almost Shakespearean. It does highlight the precarious nature of the automotive world, especially for a smaller company like Noble.
It does. The M15 may be a forgotten chapter in Noble's story, but it's a chapter that's full of lessons, isn't it? About ambition, about resilience, and just the unpredictable nature of this industry.
It is, and it highlights that tension between staying true to your roots and, well, adapting to a changing market. It's something Noble has had to navigate throughout their whole history. But despite that setback, they persevered, they regrouped, and ultimately they channeled that experience into creating the incredible M600.
Which brings us back to the present. It's clear that they're not going to let anything deter them from pursuing their passion. But it is worth digging deeper into that shift in direction after the M15. Peter Dyson had a different vision for Noble, one that ultimately led to the M600.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's fascinating, actually. While Lee Noble was all about that pure driving experience, almost to the point of austerity, Dyson seemed to embrace a more extreme, track-focused approach, which was reflected in the M600's raw power and that minimalist design.
It's interesting how those two visions, while seemingly different, both led to cars that were undeniably Noble in their DNA.
Absolutely. They both emphasize that visceral connection between the driver and the machine, even if they achieved it through, slightly different means.
Which brings us to a broader question, really. We've talked a lot about Noble's unique approach, this focus on purity and driving engagement. But how do they reconcile that with the realities of the modern supercar market?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On the one hand, you've got manufacturers like Ferrari, Lamborghini, who are increasingly incorporating luxury and technology into their cars. And then you have Noble staunchly holding on to this almost analog driving experience. It's a bold strategy, to say the least.
So are they swimming against the tide, or are they tapping into a niche that's been underserved?
I think it's a bit of both, honestly. There's definitely a segment of buyers who crave that raw, unfiltered driving experience. They're tired of the screens and the driver aids. They want to feel the machine, feel the road, that pure, visceral thrill of driving. And Noble caters to that desire flawlessly.
They're almost like a refuge for drivers who, I don't know, yearn for a simpler time, a time when cars were about mechanical purity and that connection between man and machine.
And that's a powerful niche to own. Because even in this age of electrification and autonomous driving, that primal desire for speed, control, that connection with a machine, it's not going to just disappear. It's deeply ingrained in us.
So in a way, Noble is almost preserving a certain kind of driving spirit, one that's in danger of being lost in this rush towards, technology and automation.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. They're like the guardians of a flame, keeping that spirit alive for those who still seek it.
And I, for one, am grateful for that.
Me too. It gives me hope that even as the automotive landscape, keeps changing, there'll always be room for that passion, for craftsmanship, for the pure joy of driving.
And speaking of passion, there's no better embodiment of that than Lee Noble himself. His vision, his personality, it's woven into the very fabric of the company. Let's delve a little deeper into his story. What drove him to create Noble Automotive? What were some of the key decisions he made early on that shaped the company's identity?
Well, Lee Noble's a fascinating character. He's this self-taught engineer, designer with a deep-seated passion for high-performance cars. He's not a businessman. He's a true gearhead, a tinkerer who loves nothing more than extracting every ounce of performance from a machine.
He's like the embodiment of that classic British sports car builder. Kind of guy who could build a rocket ship in his garage with a screwdriver and some duct tape.
Exactly. He wasn't motivated by profits or market share or any of that. He was driven by this pure desire to create cars that were just exhilarating to drive, cars that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. And that ethos is just reflected in every single noble car that's ever been built.
I remember reading a quote from him once where he said, "I don't build cars for people who want to pose in them. I build cars for people who want to drive them." And that pretty much sums up his philosophy, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He had no interest in creating, status symbols or luxury cruisers. He was building cars for people who appreciated that visceral thrill of driving, that connection between man and machine, that pursuit of speed and handling.
That's what makes Noble Automotive so unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're not trying to fit into some preconceived mold. They're doing things their own way, following their own path, and creating cars that are a true reflection of their founder's vision.
It's a testament to the power of individuality, of passion, and of just this relentless pursuit of excellence.
So besides that burning passion, what were some of the specific decisions Lee Noble made that shaped Noble's identity?
Well, one of the most crucial decisions was his focus on lightweight construction. He understood that keeping the weight down was absolutely essential for achieving, optimal performance and handling. And that philosophy became a cornerstone of every single Noble car that followed.
Yeah. And it's interesting how that philosophy has remained a core part of Noble's identity, even after Lee Noble himself left the company. It's like it's ingrained in their DNA.
It's true. You see it in their choice of materials, their engineering solutions, their overall design ethos. They're not chasing horsepower figures or top speed records. They're obsessed with creating cars that are agile, responsive, and just incredibly engaging to drive.
It's a very British approach to sports car design, isn't it? Reminiscent of companies like Lotus and Caterham, where weight is the enemy and handling is king.
Exactly. And another key decision Lee made was to use readily available components whenever possible. He didn't want to rely on exotic, expensive parts that would drive up the cost of the cars.
Right. It was a very pragmatic approach that allowed them to create these, high-performance cars that were still relatively affordable, at least compared to their Italian counterparts.
Absolutely. They sourced engines from Ford, transmissions from Getrag, other components from well-established suppliers. This not only kept the costs down, but also made the parts much more accessible for, servicing and maintenance.
Smart strategy, especially for a smaller company with limited resources.
It speaks to Lee Noble's engineering background.
Hmm.
He was a problem solver, a man who could, make things work with what he had available. There's a great story about how he developed the first Noble prototype, the M10, in his own garage, using whatever tools and materials he could get his hands on.
That's a classic underdog story.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that hands-on approach, that willingness to experiment and innovate, that really shaped the early days of Noble Automotive and, laid the foundation for everything that followed. But to really understand what put Noble on the map, we need to take a closer look at the M12.
Let's do that. What were some of the key features, the innovations that made the M12 such a sensation? It was a game changer, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. The M12 was the culmination of everything Lee Noble had learned and experienced in his career. He poured his heart and soul into that car, and it showed.
And the result was a car that delivered exceptional performance, handling, at a price that was almost unheard of in the supercar world.
It was a giant slayer. One of the key innovations, as we touched upon earlier, was the use of that modified Ford Duratec V6 engine. Again, it was a readily available engine, but Noble's team squeezed every last drop of performance out of it.
They were essentially alchemists, transforming a humble Ford engine into a raging beast.
Yeah, great analogy. And of course, they coupled that potent engine with a lightweight chassis and body, resulting in this incredible power-to-weight ratio. That's what gave the M12 its edge.
Right. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about agility, responsiveness.
Exactly. And they achieved that through meticulous chassis tuning, a perfectly balanced weight distribution, and a responsive steering system. The M12, it just felt alive in your hands. It communicated every single nuance of the road surface.
And that's where Lee Noble's brilliance as an engineer really shines through. He understood that a truly great sports car, it isn't just about raw power. It's about how that power is delivered and how the car interacts with the driver.
Absolutely. He was obsessed with creating a car that rewarded skilled driving.
It's interesting to note that the M12 wasn't originally intended to be a road car. It was conceived as a track-focused machine.
Right.
But they quickly realized that it had the potential to be so much more. Thankfully, they made the decision to make it road legal.
They did.
And that decision paid off in spades. The M12 became a global sensation. It attracted attention from enthusiasts and journalists worldwide,
It did.
and it challenged the established order. It proved that you didn't need, a multi-million-dollar budget to build a world-class sports car.
That's right.
And its success, well, it paved the way for everything that followed. It really cemented Noble Automotive's place in the
Yeah.
world of high-performance cars.
It did. It was a defining moment for them. But their story didn't end there.
It didn't. And we'll be back in just a moment to dive even deeper into Noble's evolution, exploring the models that came after the M12 and the challenges they faced along the way.
It's going to get even more interesting. Stay tuned. So we've talked about the M12 being a true game changer, but Noble, they didn't just rest on their laurels, did they? They kept pushing, kept refining their vision, and we see that with models like the M400.
The M400, essentially a more hardcore, track-focused evolution of the M12, right?
Exactly. It's like they took everything great about the M12 and just dialed it up. More power, more agility, more raw driving thrills.
They took that Ford Duratec V6 and cranked it up to, was it 425 horsepower?
Yeah.
That's a serious jump from the M12's already impressive output.
You got it. And they didn't stop there. The chassis and suspension were also tweaked and tuned for even sharper handling. The M400 was, it was born to be pushed to its absolute limits, born to just devour corners on a racetrack.
And it had the numbers to back it up, too. 0 to 60 in just over 3 seconds.
Yeah.
A top speed north of 185 miles per hour. Those are serious figures, even by today's standards.
Absolutely. It was a giant slayer, capable of humiliating much more expensive supercars. But here's the key. It didn't lose that essential Noble DNA, that focus on driver feedback, on feeling every input, every response from the car. It was a visceral experience, not a sanitized one.
It seems like they managed to strike that perfect balance, between raw performance and driver engagement. That's a rare feat.
It really is. The M400, it remains a highly sought-after car among enthusiasts today. It's a testament to that enduring appeal of a well-engineered, driver-focused sports car, unburdened by excessive technology or frills.
It embodies that less is more philosophy that we see throughout Noble's history.
Absolutely. And that philosophy is even more apparent in their current flagship, the M600. We've touched upon it a bit, but I think it's worth exploring how this car represents, the evolution or perhaps the distillation of Noble's core principles.
I'm all for that. We know it's a powerhouse with that Yamaha-derived V8 churning out 650 horsepower. But what else sets the M600 apart? What makes it a true flagship for Noble?
Well, for starters, let's talk about that engine. It's pretty fascinating that they opted for a Yamaha V8. Originally designed for the Volvo XC90, believe it or not. It's not your typical supercar power plant, which just speaks to Noble's unconventional approach.
Right, it's not about badge prestige or following the crowd. It's about finding the right tool for the job, regardless of where it comes from.
Exactly. And they've clearly worked their magic on that engine. But beyond the, raw power, what really defines the M600 is its almost monastic dedication to driver engagement. There's a deliberate lack of electronic intervention, no traction control, no stability control, just you, the car, and the road.
It's like they're saying, look, we trust you to handle this, which is a refreshing change of pace in a world where cars are increasingly trying to, drive themselves.
Exactly, and the driving experience is all the more rewarding for it. You're not insulated from the car's responses, you're directly connected to them. It demands your full attention, your skill, your respect.
It's not a car for the casual driver, that's for sure.
Definitely not. But for those who seek that level of purity, that visceral connection with a machine, the M600 is a revelation. It's a car that rewards you for your effort, for your mastery of the driving craft.
And it's interesting how that minimalist approach extends to the car's interior as well. It's so stripped down, almost Spartan by, modern supercar standards.
Yeah. There's a certain beauty in that simplicity, though, isn't there? No massive infotainment screens, no distractions. It's all about the essentials. The steering wheel, the pedals, the gauges. Your focus is exactly where it should be. On the road, on the car, on the act of driving.
It's a refreshing antidote to that sensory overload that we experience in so many modern cars.
I completely agree. And to further emphasize that point, Noble didn't even offer an automatic transmission option for the M600. It's a 6-speed manual, pure and simple.
It's like a bold statement, They're not trying to cater to the widest possible audience. They're building cars for a select few who understand and appreciate that level of driver involvement.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so special, I think. They're not afraid to stick to their guns, to build cars that are true to their, core philosophy, even if it means appealing to a smaller, more niche market.
But let's be honest, they're not operating in a vacuum, right? They're a small, independent manufacturer competing against some of the biggest names in the industry. How do they manage to survive, let alone thrive, in such a challenging environment?
It's a David versus Goliath scenario, no doubt. But Noble, they have a few key advantages that allow them to, punch above their weight. First, their laser focus on a very specific niche that gives them a real edge. They're not trying to be all things to all people. They know exactly who their target audience is, and they cater to them flawlessly.
They're not chasing trends or trying to be the next big thing. They're simply doing what they do best, building exceptional drivers' cars.
Exactly. And that focus allows them to really excel in areas that larger manufacturers might not prioritize as highly. They're obsessed with lightweight construction, meticulous engineering, and that pure, unadulterated driving experience.
It's almost like they're operating on a different plane, in a different dimension of the automotive world, where the numbers on a spec sheet are secondary to the feeling you get behind the wheel.
I love that analogy. And they're not afraid to take risks, to push boundaries, to constantly innovate. We saw that with the M15, even though that project ultimately didn't, come to fruition.
Right. It's a reminder that they're not content with just resting on their laurels. They're always striving to improve, to evolve, to push the boundaries of what's possible.
And let's not forget the power of their brand story, too. Noble Automotive is a company built on passion, dedication, and a relentless pursuit of driving perfection. That story, it resonates deeply with enthusiasts and sets them apart from the more, corporate, mass-produced feel of some of their competitors.
There's an authenticity to Noble that's hard to find these days. It's a company that's driven by a genuine love of cars and a desire to create something truly exceptional.
Absolutely. And that passion is evident in every car they build.
It seems like they've carved out this unique space for themselves, a haven for drivers who crave a more, analog, more connected driving experience.
They have, and it's a space that's becoming increasingly valuable, I think, as the automotive landscape becomes more and more dominated by technology and automation.
So, in a way, Noble is almost preserving a certain kind of driving spirit, one that's in danger of being lost in this rush toward the future.
That's a great way to put it. They're like the keepers of a flame, reminding us of the simple joys of driving, that visceral connection between man and machine.
And that's a legacy worth celebrating, for sure. But their story isn't over yet. They recently introduced the M500, which seems to be aimed at, maybe a slightly different audience.
The M500 is an interesting addition to the Noble lineup. It kind of sits below the M600 in terms of price and, outright performance, but it retains that essential Noble DNA, a focus on driver engagement and a pure, unfiltered driving experience.
So it's like a more accessible entry point into the world of Noble without compromising their core values.
Exactly. It's still a very capable sports car with a, potent engine and a lightweight chassis, but it's not quite as extreme or as uncompromising as the M600.
And what about the engine? Are they still using Ford power plants, or have they branched out a bit for the M500?
The M500 actually marks a bit of a departure from their reliance on Ford engines. They've chosen to use a twin turbocharged V6, delivering over 550 horsepower.
Okay. Still a serious amount of power, but perhaps a bit more, manageable for everyday driving.
That seems to be the idea, and importantly, they stuck with a manual transmission, maintaining that direct connection between the driver and the car. It's clear that they're not willing to compromise on those core principles, even as they explore new segments of the market.
It's fascinating how they've managed to carve out this niche for themselves, this space for drivers who really value that purity, that engagement above, all else.
It's a testament to their vision, to their commitment to building cars that are truly special, cars that speak to, the heart of the driving enthusiast.
And it speaks to that enduring appeal of a simpler, more mechanical driving experience.
Absolutely. There will always be a place for cars that prioritize the connection between the driver and the machine. Cars that remind us of the simple joy of driving.
Well said. Now, earlier we talked about, the demise of the M15, that project that seems full of promise, but ultimately fell victim to, circumstance. It's a fascinating chapter in Noble's history, one that reveals both their ambition and the challenges they faced. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why that particular project didn't make it to production.
Yeah. The M15 It's a bittersweet story for sure. It was a bold step for Noble, aiming to create a more refined, more luxurious offering while still staying true to those, performance roots. They invested heavily in the project, developing a brand new platform, a bespoke transmission. The design was a significant departure from their previous
It
models.
seemed like they were ready to, I don't know, really take on the established players in that supercar market.
They were, and the early feedback from journalists was, it was overwhelmingly positive. The M15 prototype, it was praised for its improved refinement, its exceptional handling, its overall performance. It seemed like they had a real winner on their hands.
But then, as we know, it all kind of came crashing down.
It did. And there are, I think, a few key factors that contributed to the M15's demise. Firstly, there were funding issues. Developing a completely new car from the ground up, that's a hugely expensive undertaking. And it seems that Noble simply didn't have the resources to see the project through to completion.
Right. And then there was the change in ownership with Peter Dyson, taking the helm.
Right, that was a real turning point. Dyson, he had a different vision for Noble. He was much more focused on creating, those extreme track-focused machines. And the M15, with its emphasis on, refinement and everyday usability, it didn't quite fit into that vision.
And then, of course, there's that, well, almost Shakespearean story of Dyson ordering the existing M15 prototypes to be destroyed.
Yeah, what a dramatic end to a promising project. But in a way, the M15's failure is just as important to Noble's story as their successes. It highlights the challenges that are faced by small, independent car manufacturers, this delicate balance between innovation and financial reality.
It's a reminder that even the most, passionate visionaries can be brought down by circumstance.
It's true, but it's also a testament to Noble's resilience, that they were able to bounce back from that setback, regroup, and ultimately go on to create the incredible M600.
It speaks to that unwavering commitment to their craft.
Absolutely. The M15 may be a footnote in Noble's history, but it's a footnote that's full of valuable lessons about ambition, about risk, about the unpredictable nature of, the automotive industry.
Well said. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the man behind the machines. Lee Noble himself. We've mentioned his name throughout our discussion, but I'd love to delve a bit deeper into his story, his personality, and what drove him to create Noble Automotive.
Oh, absolutely. Lee Noble he's a fascinating figure in the automotive world. He's this self-taught engineer and designer with this deep-seated passion for high-performance cars. He's not a businessman or a marketing guru or anything like that. He is a true gearhead through and through.
He's like the embodiment of that, classic British sports car builder,
Yeah.
tinkering away in a garage, obsessed with extracting every ounce of performance from a machine.
Exactly. And he's fiercely independent, driven by a pure desire to create cars that are, exhilarating to drive, cars that push the boundaries of what's possible. And he's not motivated by profits or market share or any of that. He's motivated by passion, pure passion.
And that passion is, well, it's evident in every car that bears the Noble name.
It is. And there's a quote from him that I think sums up his philosophy perfectly. He said, "I don't build cars for people who want to pose in them. I build cars for people who want to drive them."
It's a simple statement, but it speaks volumes about his, approach to car design.
It does. He's not interested in creating, status symbols or luxury cruisers or anything like that. He's building cars for people who appreciate that raw thrill of driving, that connection between man and machine, that pursuit of speed and handling.
And that's what makes Noble Automotive so unique, isn't it? They're not chasing trends. They're not trying to fit into a preconceived mold or anything like that. They're doing things their own way, following their own path, and creating cars that are a true reflection of their founder's vision.
It's a testament to the power of individuality, of passion, and of a relentless pursuit of excellence.
So besides that burning passion, what were some of the specific decisions that Lee Noble made early on that really shaped the identity of Noble Automotive?
Well, one of the most important decisions, as we've touched upon before, was this unwavering focus on lightweight construction. He understood that minimizing weight was absolutely crucial for achieving both optimal performance and handling. And that philosophy, it became a cornerstone of every single Noble car that's followed.
It's interesting how that philosophy has remained such a, core part of Noble's identity, even after Lee Noble himself left the company.
Yeah, it's true. You see it in their choice of materials, their engineering solutions, their overall design ethos.
They're not chasing horsepower figures or top speed records for, bragging rights or anything like that. They're obsessed with creating cars that are agile, responsive, and incredibly engaging to drive.
Exactly. They're more interested in how a car feels than, how it looks on paper.
It's a very British approach to sports car design, wouldn't you say?
Hmm.
It's reminiscent of companies like Lotus and Caterham, where weight is the enemy and handling is king.
You're absolutely right. And another key decision that Lee made was to use, readily available components whenever possible. He didn't want to rely on exotic, expensive parts that would, inflate the price of the cars and make them inaccessible to, a wider audience.
Right. It was a very pragmatic approach that allowed
Yeah.
them to create high-performance cars that were still, relatively affordable, especially compared to, some of their Italian counterparts.
Absolutely. They were sourcing engines from Ford, transmissions from Getrag, other components from well-established suppliers. And this not only kept the costs down, but it also ensured that the parts would be readily available for, servicing and maintenance.
Smart strategy, especially for a small independent company with limited resources.
It was, and it speaks to Lee Noble's, engineering background. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, to find creative solutions to problems.
With a true innovator.
He was, and that hands-on approach, that willingness to experiment, to innovate, that really shaped the early days of Noble Automotive, and it laid the foundation for everything that followed. But to truly understand what put Noble on the map, we need to go back to the M12. That's the car that really launched them into the spotlight.
Let's do that. What were some of the key features, the innovations that made the M12 such a sensation? It was a game changer. There's no doubt about that.
The M12, well, it was the culmination of everything Lee Noble had learned and experienced in his career. He poured his heart and soul into that car, and it showed.
And the world took notice.
They did, and for good reason. The M12, it delivered exceptional performance, handling, at a price that was practically unheard of in the supercar world. It was a giant killer, a true David and Goliath story.
And it all started with that modified Ford Duratec V6 engine.
Right. It wasn't some, exotic, bespoke power plant. It was a readily available engine that Noble's team just meticulously tuned and tweaked to extract every last ounce of performance. They were true masters of their craft.
They were alchemists, turning a humble Ford engine into a raging beast.
I love that analogy. And of course, they coupled that potent engine with a lightweight chassis and body. And that resulted in this, incredible power-to-weight ratio. That's what really gave the M12 its edge.
Right. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about agility, responsiveness.
Exactly. And they achieved that through meticulous chassis tuning, a perfectly balanced weight distribution, a responsive steering system. The M12 just, felt alive in your hands. It communicated every nuance of the road surface.
And that's where Lee Noble's brilliance as an engineer, truly shines through. He understood that a truly great sports car, it's not just about raw power. It's about how that power is delivered
Yeah.
and how the car interacts with the driver.
Absolutely. He was obsessed with creating a car that rewarded, skilled driving.
Yeah.
A car that made you feel truly connected to the machine.
It's interesting to note that the M12 wasn't originally intended to be a road car at all. It was conceived as a track-focused machine.
It was, but thankfully they saw its potential to be so much more. And that decision to make it road legal, well, that was a stroke of genius.
It certainly was. The M12 became a global sensation. It captivated the attention of enthusiasts and journalists worldwide.
It really did.
It challenged that established order.
Yeah.
It proved that you didn't need a multi-million-dollar budget to build a world-class sports car.
Right.
And its success, well, it paved the way for everything that followed. The M12 truly solidified Noble Automotive's place in the pantheon of high-performance cars.
It did. It was a defining moment for them. But their story doesn't end there.
It doesn't.
There.
And we'll delve into the next chapter of their journey after a quick break. Stay tuned. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From Lee Noble's early vision to the triumphs and tribulations of models like the M12 and the M15. But it feels like there's a bigger story here, a thread that kind of runs through all of Noble's creations.
You're right. There is. It's not just about the cars themselves, but about a certain philosophy and approach to driving that Noble really championed.
Right. This idea of purity, of stripping away all the excess, and just focusing on that raw connection between the driver and the machine.
Almost like they're rebelling against that, that whole trend of over-engineered, over-digitalized cars. They're offering a haven, really, for drivers who yearn for that simpler, more mechanical experience.
And in a world where cars are, increasingly trying to take over the driving task themselves,
Yeah.
that kind of philosophy feels almost I don't know, radical.
It does, doesn't it? But I think it also taps into something primal, something fundamental about our, human desire to control a powerful machine, to feel the feedback, the responsiveness, the thrill of being in command.
That feeling of being truly present in the moment, fully engaged with the act of driving.
Exactly. And that's what Noble understands so well. They're not just building cars, they're crafting experiences, creating a space where drivers can, connect with their primal instincts, where they can escape that digital noise and just immerse themselves in the pure joy of driving.
And they're doing it with a level of craftsmanship, attention to detail that's becoming increasingly rare in this mass-produced world of modern automobiles.
Absolutely. They're not afraid to sweat the small stuff, to obsess over those tiny details of engineering and design that ultimately make the difference between a good car and a truly great one.
It's like they're, I don't know, handcrafting bespoke driving experiences, tailoring each car to deliver very specific kind of thrill.
That's a perfect way to put it. They're not just building cars, they're creating works of art, mechanical sculptures that are as much about emotion as they are about, engineering.
And that brings us to the question of their future.
Mm.
We've talked about the challenges that they face as a small independent manufacturer in this, increasingly competitive market.
Mhm.
But do you think their philosophy, their approach to driving, does it have the staying power to survive in a world that's changing so rapidly?
That's a tough question. The automotive industry is, well, it's in a state of flux right now, wouldn't you say? With electrification, autonomy, and connectivity, all converging to reshape the very definition of what a car is and how we interact with it.
It's almost like we're on the cusp of a new era. And it's hard to predict who the winners and losers will be.
That's true. But I do believe that there will always be a place for companies like Noble, for cars that, truly prioritize the driving experience above all else.
Because no matter how advanced technology becomes, there's something timeless about the visceral thrill of, driving a well-engineered machine. Of feeling the feedback through the steering wheel, the G-forces pushing you back in your seat, the roar of the engine as you accelerate through a corner.
Those sensations, they're primal, they're fundamental to the human experience. And I don't think they'll ever disappear entirely.
I agree. And as long as there are drivers who crave that kind of visceral connection, companies like Noble, they'll have a market. They'll have a following, a reason to exist.
They represent a certain ideal, a purity of purpose that's becoming increasingly rare in the modern world. And that's something worth preserving, something worth fighting for.
It's a reminder that driving, it can be more than just a means of transportation. It can be an art form, a passion, a way of life.
Beautifully said. And Noble Automotive is, well, their shining example of that spirit.
Well, I think we've covered just about everything there is to say about Noble Automotive, at least for now. It's been an incredible journey, exploring their history, their philosophy, and their impact on the world of high-performance cars.
It really has. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. They're a fascinating company, one that I'll definitely be watching closely in the years to come.
Me too. And for all you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners out there, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Noble Automotive. It's a company that truly embodies the spirit of driving passion and innovation, and they're definitely a name to keep on your radar.
Absolutely. They're a reminder that even in an industry, increasingly dominated by technology, there's still room for passion, for craftsmanship, and for the pure joy of driving.
And that's a message worth celebrating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Noble Automotive. We'll be back soon with another exploration of, well, automotive history and passion. And remember, a brand new episode of Vintage Car Chronicles drops every single day on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and YouTube. So you'll always have something exciting to listen to. Until next time, keep the rubber side down and the passion for cars alive.